Today's daf we're going to learn is Moed Katan Yud Bet. Today's daf is sponsored by Judith Weil in loving memory of Rabbi Simcha Kraus, who passed away this past Thursday. A Gadol Hador who believed history will judge us on the issue of Agunot and so devoted his life and extraordinary knowledge and abilities to ameliorate their plight. Yehi Zichro Baruch. And today's daf is sponsored anonymously to show love and support for women undergoing IVF. Okay, we're going to start at the top of our daf. I just want to remind you where we ended because it's a topic that's going to come up a lot in today's daf, which is this idea. We ended with the story and we said, why did he do something that theoretically, remember, he took out one of the oxen from the pair because he was in Avelut. And then we said he thought that Adam Chashuv Shani, because he was an important person, he needed to act differently. Okay, now we're going to go back to, yesterday we dealt with Avelut issues, mourners. Today we're going to move back to Chol Moed, Shabbat, Yom Tov. We're going to have like a mush of all them together in a lot of the cases. And let's get started. Amar Shmuel, Mekablei Kibolet, B'toch HaTchum Asur, Chutz L'Tchum Mutar. Okay, we talked about Kablanut. I'll review again what is Kablanut. A contract worker. This is a worker who basically takes on a job. As opposed to saying, I'm going to work for you, however many, I get paid by the hour, I'm going to get paid for the job. So if you have Gentiles who work for you, B'kibolet, okay, so they're, let's say, building your house. You hire a contractor to build your house on some property. If it's b'toch hatchum, if it's within Tchum Shabbat, then they're not allowed to work and build your house on Shabbat. In other words, you could say, what do you mean? He's my contractor. It doesn't matter to me whether he works on Shabbat. It's his job, right? It's like you bring stuff to a laundromat and they do your laundry on Shabbat. It's not your business. You plan to pick it up on Sunday afternoon. They have enough time to do it Sunday, or you brought it in Thursday. As long as they have enough time to get it done on Shabbat, it really doesn't matter. That's a job b'kablanut. If you have someone working for you by the hour, then they can't do work for you that you yourself can't do on Shabbat. So if you hire someone to come to your house and sew your clothes on Shabbat, that would be a problem. So here we say, if they took it as a contract job, if it's within Tchum Shabbat, that we're going to have to see. Okay, this obviously, we're going to see in a minute or 2 minutes that this has to do only on Shabbat and Yom Tov and not on Chol Moed, because Chol Moed, Tchum Shabbat is an irrelevant issue. Tchum Shabbat is the space beyond which you're not allowed to leave. You can be in your city and you can be 2,000 cubits outside your city, but you can't go beyond that. Now, if it's outside your Tchum and they have a job, let's say you have a property way out there in the middle of nowhere and they're building it, so they can do it if they want on Shabbat or Yom Tov, because nobody's seeing it. It's their choice. It's their work. They can do it whenever they want, even though it's for you. So Amar Papa va'afilu chutz l'tchum la'amaran ela delei kamata demikar v'lahata. He says, wait a minute. That's only if there's no other city where Jews live that's near your property. Let's say your property might be outside of your Tchum Shabbat, but it's within the Tchum of some other city. If there's a city where Jews live and they see them working on your house on Shabbat, what's the problem? They'll think that maybe you hire these workers as day workers and not as contract workers. They don't know. When they see someone in your house, they have no idea, is he a contract worker? Is he a day worker? And then they'll think that it's permitted to do this. And we're going to see this whole theme throughout, and we've seen it a lot already with Chol Moed, that there's concern that people will see and get confused. Now, you could see that there's certain things people will get confused about. Right? Having a Gentile do work for you on Shabbat is something that is quite confusing halachically. Can you do it? Can't you do it? Under what circumstances? It's not a clear-cut issue. So all the more so, we want to be careful that people don't misconstrue. Likewise, Chol Moed, and we're going to get to this today, how confusing the laws of Chol Moed are, right? If you're not confused yet by this Masechet, right? It's quite confusing to understand from all these unique cases what case is, what case isn't, right? How we deal with this. So basically, the question is, according to Rav Papa, he says, if someone can see who's a Jew, then it's a problem. It's not just the people in your own city. If there's a city that's close to there, where the assumption is where there's Jews living, asur, then even outside the Tchum, it will be forbidden for him to do this. And then, this is what I said, we get back to Amar Rav Masharshia, this whole thing where if there's no city near it, you can have the Gentiles do whatever they want. They can build it because there's no, as we call, marit ayin issue that they're going to see and people will see and think. Well, obviously, because on Shabbos and Yom Tov, people don't go there. Once it's outside the Tchum, no one's going to be able to get there. So you're not worried about people seeing because there is no one to see. But on Chol Moed, People go there because there is no, right? The assumption is people don't go there because it's forbidden. Once everyone's allowed to walk beyond Chum Shabbat because Chol Moed, there's no issue, and people can travel on Chol Moed, so therefore asur. Here you end up with something very interesting. Something that's actually forbidden, it's permitted on Shabbat is going to be forbidden on Chol Moed, right? It becomes ironic that because, by the way, it sounds like something that probably most of you have never heard of here, which is that it sounds here like you can't have a Gentile work on your house like if you're doing a construction, it sounds like they can't work on your house on Chol Moed, right? That's what it sounds like from the sugya. I didn't check, what we say halacha l'maaseh, and I know for sure people do this kind of thing. The question is, it seems from here that it would be totally forbidden because you're not allowed to build yourself, right? It's not davar ha'aved, right? You just push off the shiputz, your construction for another week. So it sounds very interesting here. It seems to indicate, according to Rav Misharshia, for sure, even if it's outside the city, and for sure if it's inside the city, everyone seems to say it's a problem. You can't have Gentiles building your house on Chol Moed. So it seems to forget about Jewish workers, right? So it's interesting. Marzutra Bereid Rav Nachman, again, I'm not paskening, I'm just kind of putting it out there that it does sound like there would be an issue involved here. Marzutra Bereid Rav Nachman, now we're going to have a story. So he says, Banule apanda mikable kibole chutz l'tchum. He built a palace or a beautiful house with using contract workers outside the tchum, which according to what we saw before, should be totally fine. Iklar of Safra of Rav Huna bar Chinana, they happened upon the place, V'lo alu legabe. They wouldn't go inside. They said, we're not benefiting from this house that was built in a forbidden manner. V'igad Amre, some people say, Hunami lo al begave. Even he himself, Marzutra, wouldn't go in. To which the Gemara says, I don't get it. B'hamar Shmuel, didn't we just learn? Mikablei kibola, Shmuel said, Mikablei kibola b'toch ha'tchum asul. Chutz l'tchum mutav. And this is outside the tchum, it's permitted. So why didn't anyone go in there? So two possible answers. One is, back to where we ended yesterday, Adam Chashuv Shani. He had to keep a higher standard. And he shouldn't have even, and which is fascinating to say, because not only are we saying he should have kept a higher standard. However, what he's saying is, in Adam Chashuv Shani, meaning that even after the fact that it's already built, you have to say, you know what, I'm keeping a higher standard and I can't let this happen, right? It could be he didn't know his workers were doing it. He found out later that they did it on Shabbat. And then he said, I can't use this house, right? It sounds a little bit crazy. And Ika de Amre, some people say, betivna bahadayu. What does it mean, a contract worker? If I'm doing construction in my house, what will happen? I'll hire a contractor. The contractor will say, okay, listen, here's the price. This includes all the materials, everything, right? They usually bring everything. A different way to do it is you say, listen, I don't want to pay you top dollar to bring all the stuff. I'll buy the stuff for cheap. I'll bring you the materials and you do the work. Once you do that, it's no longer kablanut. So some people say that's what he did. He brought the straw, he brought the stuff, he brought the materials. And because he brought the materials, it was not considered kablanut. And then it already becomes what's the opposite of kablanut? It's more like a Shiur Yomi. He got paid by the hour, he got paid for the job, he got paid by the hour, not by the job. And then it's a different, right? The question is, where do you draw the line? So here they say, as soon as you bring the materials, then he's no longer considered a kablan. A kablan is, the whole job is mine, right? I'm going to give you a complete finished product. You're not going to be involved at all. Once you're somewhat involved, then his doing work on Shabbat, Chol Moed, or whatever it might be, Yom Tov, is really like you're doing the work. And then it's a problem. Okay. So anyway, yeah, I know I've raised this big issue about this construction in Chol Moed. So I really haven't heard of it before, but it really does seem like there's an issue here, but I really don't know halacha l'maaseh. Okay, I always say that's not my job here. I'll raise the questions. You can go look up the answers. Okay, next. Rav Chama Sharale la Avungare de Beresh Galuta lemea balahu avodata bechola de Moeda. He allowed these Avungari, we'll talk about this in a minute, of the house of the Reish Galuta. Remember, that's the exilarch, to do their work on Chol Moed. So what are Avungari and what is their work? We don't really know. There's different opinions. Some people say they were bathhouse attendants and then they did the bathhouse work, which isn't really work that's forbidden on Chol Moed, right? It's just the question is, can you work on Chol Moed, right? This here becomes another issue. If the work is permitted for the person to do on Chol Moed, are you allowed to actually work in a job like that? Like, let's say you work as a chef. You can cook, so can you work as a chef, getting a salary, right? That's two different things, right? To cook in your own house, not the same as working as a chef. Some people say that they were in charge of the tables, and the Avid Avidatayu is, right, they would set up the tables. Remember, the Reish Galut always had a lot of guests, especially on the holidays. And then Avid Avidata is if the tables broke, then they would fix the tables, which again is Tzorech HaMoed. So therefore it would work, right? Because it's for the need of the Moed, but then again, it's more like a job. So they allowed it. Okay. Rav Chama said the people that work in the Exilarch's house, they can do whatever it is that they can do, which seems to be malacha that would have been permitted for an individual to do. They can do it as a job. However, Amal, he said the following thing, and we're going to see that it wasn't exactly a job. Hevan da agar lo kashakle, since they don't get paid for this. Okay, it was a job, but it wasn't a salary job. What did they do? They would sit at the table of the Reish Galut and get free food, basically. It wasn't like a real job. It was a job. You do some work and you get to eat food. Okay, so since that's the case, late lamba, there's no problem. But it does sound from here that if you would get paid, it would be specifically an issue. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Kablin kibolet b'moed la'asota la'achar hamoed. Again, I know you're all thinking, well, oh, you can't work at all. You can't make any money. I mean, even on Shabbat, I see you writing in the chat also, right? Even on Shabbat, people can make money. You have to do it in a way, they call it havla, where you work, but you really work when it's not Shabbat, and then you get paid the whole amount as a whole. So even on Shabbat, there's solutions. And hold off, because we're going to see later in the Gemara that the Gemara is going to basically even look at this point blank and say, we have an issue with all these halachot. How do we learn from each of these individual cases to what we actually do practically? And they basically say, we'll see it soon in the Gemara today, this is a complicated issue, this whole thing, because we have case. What we derive from that case, halacha l'maaseh, is super confusing. Okay, so if you're confused, not to worry, they were confused as well. Even in the Gemara, they say this. So it's confusing because this Masechet takes a lot of case. We don't even know all the details. We don't really know who these Avangari were, right? We have one who claims bath attendants. We have one who claims they were fixing tables. We don't really know. So it's very hard to come to clear halachic conclusions from here. And that's why I think the whole area of Chol Moed is very gray, because it's very complicated. Okay, next. It's not just it's complicated, to, let's say, understand. It's complicated to know what they were referring to, what all their cases were, and therefore what all the details of what's allowed and what's not. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Mikablim kibolet b'moed la'asota la'achar hamoed. Okay, most of the commentaries say here, we're talking about giving something to a Gentile. So you can bring your work to a Gentile on Chol Moed, as long as you say, I want you to, right, remember, this is Kablanut. It means I'm giving you a job. Let's say I'm giving you my dry cleaning, but you can only pick it up after the holiday. You can't say I'm bringing you my dry cleaning on the holiday to be done on the holiday. You can say I'm bringing it to you now, even though it's the holiday. I want to pick it up a day or two after the holiday. U'b'moed asur, but you can't say I want it for the holiday. Klalo shel davar. Here's the general rule. Kol shu oseh, omer l'noch rivo oseh. This is what we talked about before. If I can do it myself, then I can tell the Gentile to do it. But kol she'eino oseh, eino omer l'noch rivo oseh. But if I can't do it myself, I can't ask them to do it. Tanya idach, another bright. Mekablin kibolet b'moed. This is very similar. La'asota la'achar moed. I can bring my laundry to the laundromat, to the dry cleaners, but now we're going to see maybe it's actually a problem. Let's say I bring a few kilos of laundry, a few pounds of laundry. They weigh it. So here it says you can't weigh it. I bring 5 shirts to get pressed. Can't do it because they have to count it. Right? Any sort of counting, weighing, measuring is going to be a problem. Tanu Rabbanan. You can't. Okay, this maybe is a less likely one for you to be wanting to do, but mate your animals one on the other. That's considered work, okay? Because it's physical. You have to physically take one and put it on top of the other. I don't know exactly how you do it, but mating them is an issue. Now, since we already determined that harba'ah, mating animals, is considered work, we now say a totally unrelated halacha, which is we have sanctified animals, which are a firstborn animal is sanctified, and an animal that was designated as a sacrifice, but then ended up being disqualified, they have a level of sanctity on them and they can't be worked. So therefore, you also can't do harba'ah, mating, because harba'ah is malacha. We just defined that. So therefore, you wouldn't be able to work. You wouldn't be able to ever do it to those animals, not connected to Chol Moed or anything else. Tanya Idach, another braita. Same thing, but Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he has one distinction. He says, if a female donkey is in heat, then it will be a loss if we don't mate her. So you're actually allowed to mate her. There seems to be some concern with a female donkey that if you don't do it at the time, then maybe some people say she'll never mate again. I don't know if that's true. Some people say it's just that we'll lose a lot of potential mating. Maybe her period is very short. I don't know. But she seems to be different than all the other animals. Other animals, you put them in an enclosed area, and then you hope that they're going to mate on their own, but you can't actually mate them physically, but you can kind of, let it happen. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, if we're talking about animals and having them do things, now we have another issue. People wanted their animals to fertilize the land by basically, laying their dung around the property. So on Chol Moed and on Shabbat and on Chag, ein medayrin, you can't lead your animals into your field to basically fertilize the field. Lo b'Shabbatov, lo b'Yamim Tovim, lo b'Chol Moed. Okay, not Shabbat, not Yom Tov, not Chol Moed. But if they decided to wander into your field and do their thing in your field, well, that's fine. That wasn't your doing. And then the Gemara assumes, the commentaries assume here that then we're jumping into not only that, but if you have a Gentile shepherd and he brings the animals into the field, that's also fine. Okay, as long as you have nothing to do with it. Okay, so now we're going to have this issue that we have one Gentile here working with your animals. Ein misayinotam, you can't help them. Okay, this Gentile. And ein muslim lahem shomer lena'eret sonam. You also can't provide them with another Gentile worker to help him lina'er. We don't know what this is, lina'er tatzon. Either it means to protect them, or it means to help, again, spread them around your field, okay, to walk them around your field so that they fertilize your entire field. So basically, if a Gentile is your shepherd and he decides to do it on his own, that's totally fine, but you can't provide him with any sort of assistance, not even bring him an assistant who's a Gentile. There's an exception to the rule, though. If this Gentile works for you, you hire him on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis, or on a Shemitah basis, meaning on a 6 cycle, right? You hire him for the 6 cycles before the Shemitah year. Then you can actually give him someone to work with, because it's true you're giving him an extra worker on Chol Moed, but you're not doing it, or on Shabbat or on Yom Tov, but you're not doing it specifically. You're doing it for the whole time period. Then already it's viewed as different. Rebbe Omer, then Rebbe points out that if you're going to do that, okay, so now there's a debate about who Rebbe's talking about, because there's 2 Gentiles here. There's the one who's your shepherd, and then there's this other person that you're giving him as a helper, who's also a Gentile. So it's unclear whether Rebbe is referring to Gentile number 1 or Gentile number 2. But one of them he's referring to, again, the commentaries differ on this. What I mean is we don't know. Some commentaries say he's talking about Gentile 1, some people Gentile 2. Rebbe says, B'Shabbat, you can actually even get paid for this work, okay? If he's a Schir Shabbat, right? Shabbat means the whole week. If he's a Schir Shabbat or Schir, right? Don't get confused and think Schir Shabbat means you hired him for Shabbat. No, Shabbat is Shavua. It's very confusing. And Shavua is a 7-year cycle. So it's the words you see here are not exactly used in the way you might expect them to be used. But now the word Shabbat here does mean Shabbat. If you hired him for a week or a month or whatever it might be, again, whether we're talking about Gentile 1 or 2, we don't really know, but he can get paid on Shabbat bitova. You can't actually pay him salary for Shabbat, but he knows that you've done something good for him. And then, right, in other words, you've done him a favor by, let's say it's the second, let's just go with you've given him an extra helper. So you've paid him basically bitova. Okay, he knows that so this extra Gentile that you've hired gets, what's his reward? He knows that the other Gentile feels like he did a favor for him. And then maybe he could get the favor paid back at some point, but it's not something tangible. But Yom Tov b'mizonot, on Yom Tov he could get paid by food. And b'moed b'sachar, he can actually make a salary on Chol Moed. Now, didn't we say before you can't make a salary? That's a Jew. This is a Gentile. So if the Gentile is working for you on Chol Moed, somehow, right, in the way that's permitted, you're allowed to actually pay him. Amar Rav Yosef, Hilchata Kirebi, and Rav Yosef Paskins like Rebbe. Okay, new Mishnah. Before we go to this Mishnah, I want to remind you of the previous Mishnah. The previous Mishnah gave this example where your olives were ready to be pressed, and then we had a machlok at Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, what you could do, right? Everyone said you could start putting the beam on top. The question is, could you finish the process, or did you have to just do the first step and leave the rest? And that was Rabbi Yehuda who said you can do malacha in davar ha'aved only with a shinoi, with a change, not the typical manner, so you couldn't finish the process. We're going to have the exact same Mishnah now, not with olive oil and olives and olive oil, but with grapes and wine. And then the Gemara is going to obviously say, why do we need both Mishnayot? They're exactly parallel. If your wine was in the pit, what happens is, right, in the wine presses, you would trample on the grapes, and then it would all drip into a pit. So your wine is in the pit. And then again, something happens. You ended up in avilut, or something, you couldn't get there for whatever reason, or shit uhu, or your workers just reneged and they didn't come to work. Zolef v'gomer v'dgaf kedarko. So you can, zolef, there's different opinions what exactly it means, but let's go with, you can take it all out of the pit, put it into jugs, and then seal the jugs. That's Divrei Rabbi Yossi, who says you can do things in a normal way. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, oselo limudim b'shvil shelo yachmitz. You can cover it with something very temporary. You can't seal it. You can stick something on top. If you look in the pictures in today's stuff, there's like a wooden, you put a wooden block on top of it just to keep the air out, but you can't seal it shut. Now the Gemara says, why did you need both Mishnayot? If we just had the olive oil, apparently you have to accept this as a given. I don't know enough about things, but the olive oil is going to be more of a loss if you don't deal with it than the wine. Right? I would have thought the opposite. But since the olive oil is a much bigger loss of a chamra, therefore you might have thought that's what Rabbi Yossi says, do it in its normal manner and seal it shut. Of a chamra, but wine, delo nafish pseida, that's not such a huge loss. Maybe he would agree with Rabbi Yehuda in the wine case that you can't finish the process. And if you had only our Mishnah, you would say, again, taking the same logic, focusing on a different element, Rabbi Yehuda, you would have said, in our Mishnah, by the wine, Rabbi Yehuda says, you can't do it in its normal way because it's not the biggest loss. But in the Mishnah, by the olive oil, he would say, since it's such a big loss, you can even do it in a normal way, right? Maybe in the other one, he'd agree with Rabbi Yossi that you could do it in its normal manner. Therefore, it's tzricha. You needed to know that they actually disagree in both cases. I'm Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba. Now we're going to have an exact repeat of a sugi we saw yesterday. Man tana shinoi b'moed b'davar ha'aved tilo k'Rabbi Yossi. Who's the one who holds that you need, even though something is allowed because there'll be a loss, you still need to do it differently than normal? That is not like Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi doesn't require that. And Amar Rabbi Yosef, who soon we're going to refer to as Sinai. If you remember, there's sugyot that talk about, or maybe we haven't gotten to this yet, I don't remember in this cycle, but there's a Sinai and there's an Oker Harim. Sinai is it's like getting the Torah at Har Sinai. You heard everything. So Sinai is someone who knows everything. And Oker Harim is someone who can analyze very well. There's two different types of rabbis, people who or Talmidei Chachamim in the Gemara, ones who know a lot of information, but aren't as good as analytical. Some people are super analytical, might not know everything. So Rav Yosef is known to be a Sinai. In a little bit, we're going to refer to him as a Sinai and say Sinai paskin like Rabbi Yossi, which is exactly what we see here. So Amar Rav Yosef halachake Rabbi Yossi. I'm pointing this out because sometimes we don't pay so much attention to these terms. This Rav Yosef said halacha like Rabbi Yossi. We just pass it and say, okay, fine. But we're going to refer back to it. So I wanted you to pay attention. They asked him the following question. Can you seal a barrel of beer on Chol Moed? Okay, now until now we talked about wine, we talked about olive oil, and Rabbi Yossi said yes, right? Do it in a normal way. What about beer? So Amar Lahu, he says Sinai Amar halachake Rabbi Yossi, right? This is where I said Sinai. Rabbi Yosef said halachazak Rabbi Yossi. So why are you asking? Obviously, you could do it in its normal manner. So he says the following. Now, this was my question. Imor dama Rabbi Yossi b'chamra b'shichra miyama. He said it by olive oil. He said it by wine, but would he say the same thing by beer? It's not so much of a loss. So he says, what do you mean? What's the whole reason for wine? It's because there's going to be a loss also with with beer, it's going to be a loss if you don't seal it up. How do I know this? Damar Abaye, Amra Li'em. This is always fun. Abaye always quotes his mother, who's not really his mother. It's the woman who took care of him because his mother died in childbirth. He always says, oh, she taught me all these interesting things. What did she teach me? Barshit Save V'Shia. I'd rather have a barrel with 6 se'ah of beer that are sealed, mi bartim neveloshia, from an 8 se'ah barrel that's unsealed. Because in the end, part of that barrel, you might have more, but it's going to get ruined. So basically here you see that it is a loss, and therefore we were paskin like Rabbi Yossi as well. Amarav Chama Bar Guri Amarav. Here comes the big line of today's daf. Hilchot Moed Kilchot Kutim Bahalacha. The halachas of Chol Moed are like the halachas of the Kutim. Okay, in halacha. Okay, what are the halachas of the Kutim? It's unclear exactly what this means, different interpretations. Remember, the Kutim hold only by the Torah Shebichtav, and sometimes, right, it's random where they have interpretations that might match ours and where it's not. And they're basically saying this whole thing is a little bit random, okay? And maybe also the Kutim, in some cases, there's two things. One is they hold only by the written Torah, although they do have some oral traditions of their own, so that's why it's a little tricky. Also, the Kutim are careful about certain halachot, and they're not very careful about other halachot. And there's a lot of lack of clarity here, and almost like they're saying it's not logical. It's very hard to figure out what they're careful about, what they're not careful about. Likewise, Chol Moed, and this is why I think we're all confused, right? They were confused as well. Hilchot Chol Moed are very confusing, and they say here, Amar Rav Daniel Bar Katina, Lemay Hilchata. What is the relevance of this statement? They ask. Amar Rav Daniel Bar Katina, Loma Shehen Akurot, they're barren, which means Ein Lemedot Zomizo. We have a lot of random halachot, right? And you really feel that way with this Masechet. We're just going case, right? It doesn't have the most clear order. And the rules, what we take from this and what we can learn from here are very unclear. What they're basically saying is you have the cases they brought, and you can't really learn from each case to another case because each case is different and you don't understand all the details, and it's very complicated. Okay, so that's the first statement we're going to see about them talking about themselves almost and how they're learning this and how it's quite complicated. So anyone who's feeling overwhelmed, know that the rabbis also felt somewhat overwhelmed about these sugyot, and it was very hard to learn from there to other things. And here they bring an example. Ta'amar Shmuel, zoftin kusta ve'en zoftin chavita. You can seal with pitch a jug, but not a barrel. Rav Dimi Minahar Amal zoftin chavita ve'en zoftin kusta. He said the exact opposite, right? This is completely confusing, right? He says you can seal specifically a barrel, you can't seal a jug. Mar chayesh lepseda, umar chayesh letircha, right? When you have two things going on, one is, right, you have to worry how much loss is it going to be, and the other issue is how much work it's going to be. So each one focused on a different element. One said, I'm worried about how much work you're going to do. It's much harder to seal a barrel than it is to seal a cod, right? A jug is much smaller. It's easier to seal. Some people give opposite opinions here, but I'm going to go with what makes the most sense to me. One of the interpretations I saw, right? The simple interpretation, which is barrel is harder to seal. So it's more work, and that's why you can't do the barrel. You can do the cod. On the other hand, the barrel holds a lot more than a jug. So therefore, the other one is worried about your hefsed. It's going to be a much bigger loss if you lose everything in the barrel than if you lose everything in the jug. So therefore, we're going to allow you to do the barrel, but not the jug. So that's how you can see, right, how confusing this could be and how you can come to different conclusions from using the same, right, principles that we've been learning. So it's quite confusing. And another line about this, Amar Abaye, Naktinan, Hilchot Moed, Hilchot Shabbat. They're like Shabbat. Okay, anyone who learned Masechet Shabbat will probably remember this. Turning to Amud Bet now. Yesh mehen patur aval asur. Yesh mehen mutar l'chatchila. There's some things that from the letter of the law are okay, but the rabbis came and forbade them anyway. And some things are entirely permitted. And again, it's confusing, right? Where do you draw the line? What do we say is entirely permitted? What do we say is patur aval asur? Yes, it's not forbidden by Torah law, but the rabbis are going to come ahead and forbid it. And here, it's not exactly parallel, especially if you hold that Chol Moed isn't doraita. Patur aval asur means by Torah law, it's permitted. The rabbis came and forbade. Some people think there is no Torah law by Chol Moed. Again, it all depends on that big debate. Is it Torah? Is it not? So if you say it's Torah, you can say it's the same thing. By Torah law, there's all sorts of malacha that are permitted on Chol Moed, but the rabbis came and forbade them anyway. We talked about that because it might look like you're doing malacha, it might, right, all these things. Or it just means the basic law, the rabbinic law would seem to say this is not a problem, and yet the rabbis came and forbade it anyway. And then we saw also Adam Chashuv Shane, all these cases where they basically were stringent for all sorts of reasons. And again, it's hard to know where to draw the line. What's patur aval asur? What's mutar lechatchila? Right? It's quite confusing. So here's the rabbis. It's interesting. They're kind of taking a step out of their lives and looking into their world and saying, what we're learning is actually quite confusing and hard to come to halachic conclusions, hard to understand the logic of everything. Okay, with that, the Gemara is just going to continue on into more cases. And cases, we're going to have a few cases where somebody saw someone else doing something and got upset with them for doing it. And often it's big rabbis and it's surprising. So let's see. Rav Huna chatzte lechatzte b'moed. He went and started harvesting his crops on Chol Moed. Obviously, it must have been davar ha'aved, something that was going to would be a loss. Eitive Rabba bar Rav Huna le Rav Huna. His son, right, none more than his son, comes over to him and says, what are you doing, right? It's like you can see this scene in your house. You start doing something, your kid comes over to you and says, hey, I learned in school you can't do this. Why are you doing it? So he comes and he says, Eitive Rabba Rav Huna le Rav Huna. He brings him a braita. It says in the following braita, Tochanim kemach b'moed letzorach hamoed. You can grind flour on the holiday for the purposes of the holiday. But if it's not for the purpose of the holiday, you can't. We'll get back to this case later. This isn't really important for our purposes right now. Next, davar she'avu b'moed. If it's going to be a financial loss, mutar lasato b'moed, you can do it, which should seem to imply that he could do the field. Davar she'eino avu b'moed asul. But if it's not going to be a financial loss, then it's forbidden. In what case is this referring to? All of a sudden, we're going to limit this davar ha'aved. We haven't seen this yet before. Bitlushim min akarka. If it's, by the way, this is a tosefta. It's if it's already detached from the ground. Like let's say they picked the field and they left it out, and now it's going to rot if we leave it out, so you can bring it in. But aval mechubar lakarka. But if it's attached to the ground, afilu kulo avud. Even if your whole field is going to get ruined, asul. It says here you can't harvest your crop here. So how could you do this? He says to his father. Only the Tosefta says in ein lo ma yochal, if he has nothing to eat, then kotzer ma'amer dash v'zoleh borer v'tochen u'bavad shalei yadush b'paro. Okay, there's one exception, which is if you have absolutely no food, then you can cut it from the ground. You can go through the entire process, turn it into wheat. The only thing you can't do is thresh it not with cows. Do some sort of shinoi. Okay, remember this because this is going to sound not like Rabbi Yossi, because remember Rabbi Yossi said davar ha'aveh we allow even in a normal manner. This seems to say you have to do a little bit of a change. So now we're going to see. Amar lei. So now what does Rav Huna answer him? Yechida'ahi v'lo sfira lan kavateh. He says, don't bring me this Tosefta to question me. That's an individual's opinion. We don't hold like him. The rabbis disagree. How do I know it's Yechidah? Tanya, Klal Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. It says in a different braita that Rabban Gamliel gave the following rule. Mishum Rabbi Yossi, in the name of Rabbi Yossi, which makes it sound like this is Rabbi Yossi, but the rabbis disagree. Davar hatalush min hakarka afilu miksato avud mutar. Right, if something is detached from the ground, even if only it's a little bit davar ha'aved, it's only a small financial loss, you can do it. Because once it's attached, any kind of loss is a loss. But hamechubar lakarka, but if it's still attached to the ground, afilu kulo avud, even if you're going to lose your entire field, asul. That's Rabbi Yossi. It's interesting. Rabbi Yossi was lenient about not doing things with any sort of change, is specifically strict here. The Rabbi Yossi. Okay, so now the Gemara has a big question though. You're trying to say the Tosefta is Rabbi Yossi, but what doesn't fit in there? Rabbi Yossi yadush nami beparot. You should be able to use the parot to do the threshing, because once we permit it in a normal way according to Rabbi Yossi. So how could you possibly say this is Rabbi Yossi? The whole shinoi part doesn't make sense. So Hama Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba, remember, didn't Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba say, we already saw this a few times, Mantana shinu moed b'davar ha'aved delo Rabbi Yossi. Who's the one who says you have to change when we permit it? That's not Rabbi Yossi. So you can't tell me this Tosefta is Rabbi Yossi. Basically, Rabbanit says to him, to which Rav Huna answers, Amar lach hachinami. No, it really is. And how do I explain this issue with the parot? Kevan dechol yom alav beparot daishe ha'ina nami lav shinoihu. This is not what we call a shinoi. Shinoi is when there's one way to do things, and we say you can't do it in the normal manner. Now, when it comes to threshing, there were different ways that people threshed in a normal way. And here what they're saying is don't use the parot. Okay, why not? Right? Don't use the oxen. Why don't we want to use them, or the cows or the oxen? Don't use them. Why? Because we're worried that they will make a lot of noise and it'll be very noticeable. And again, people will see. Do it in a different way, but a different normal way. You still can do it in a typical way, just change it a little bit, right? Don't take option A, take option B, even though option A and B are basically equal. So then you could explain it even according to Rabbi Yossi. And with that, we're left with, and remember this for later, you can actually harvest your field even if everything's attached to the ground, because we don't hold by this opinion of Rabbi Yossi, even though we do hold like him when it comes to the shinoi, but we don't hold like him, right, that you don't need any sort of change once we permit it, but we don't hold like him that he doesn't permit things that are attached to the ground. Tanu Rabbanit. Now we're going to have another braita. We talked about this grinding, and we're going to see this inside now. Tochanim b'moed l'tzorach hamoed, v'shelo l'tzorach hamoed asur. If I want to ground flour, right, ground my wheat into flour, I could do that, but only what I need for the holiday. I can't do large quantities. Okay, if I do, it's forbidden. I can't benefit from it. V'im tachan v'hotir. What if I ground my flour and I ended up with some leftovers? I didn't mean to, but can't always plan exactly how much you're going to use. Harez mutar. Then obviously it's okay. You'll see this with a few other cases. You can cut wood for the purposes of the holiday, but not if it's not. Ve'im, right? You want to cut for the winter, right? You can't start doing that to save for your fireplace. Ve'im katzatz v'hotir harez mutar. But if you had extra, it's fine. Same thing. You can brew beer as long as it's for the holiday. If it's only going to be ready after, asur, or you put a ton in. But if you did it, you brewed it, and you had some extra, harez mutar, it's permitted. But if it's not, I'm sorry, did I go back? Sorry, I skipped the line. As long as you don't use trickery, right? This is what's ya'arim, where you say, oh, maybe I'm going to need a lot of beer. And you basically make a lot when in essence, you don't really need it. Or we'll see another case of harama in another minute. So now they say, Raminu, this contradicts the following source. That's so far as the same. But then it says, it doesn't matter which type of beer. Okay, that's not so important. Here's the important line. Even though you have beer in your house already, you can say, oh, I don't really want the old stuff. I want new beer. You brew beer. You end up drinking the new beer, and then you have old beer. So in essence, you really are trying to prepare for the fact that after the holiday, you'll still have beer. Okay, so that's not allowed. I'm sorry, that is allowed according to this braita. So how could we say before you can't do harama? That's why I said we'll see a bit of a different case of harama. Harama here is you basically say, I don't want that. It's like when we saw Tovet Beno, you take one out and then you go to slaughter it. And then you say, oh, you know what? I want the other one. And then you take him out of the pit when they both fell into the pit, right? Since you can't slaughter an animal and its son in one day. But if you take each one out thinking, oh, that's the one I want today, then you're allowed to do it, right? Because the whole issue was on like chag, and you're not allowed to do the work of pulling him out of the pit. But if you want to save your animal, you could do it in that way. So that's what we're saying here. So now they say, Tanaihi, how do we resolve this? It's a machloket tanaim detanya, as we see in the following braita. It's a machloket about whether you can use ha'arama or not. Rav, now we're going to see another person who harvested his field on Yom Tov and someone else who got upset with him. And we're going to have none other than Rav and Shmuel. Rav harvested his field. Shama Shmuel heard this. He got very angry with him. How on earth did you do that? So we don't understand. We're going to basically not understand Shmuel. Then we'll explain Shmuel, and then we won't understand Rav. And then we'll explain Rav, and then we won't understand Shmuel. We're going to do this ping pong because as soon as we explain one, well, then the other one makes no sense. So what happened? Shmuel got very upset. So lema Shmuel ki yichida. What did he hold? Like the opinion that Rabbi Bar of Huna brought of Rabbi Yossi? We don't hold that way. It's an individual opinion. Lo chatz dedechite havu delav pasid. It was a case that where it wasn't davar ha'aved, it wasn't going to be any loss, and that's why he got upset with him. To which we obviously have to ask, if it wasn't davar ha'aved, what was Rav doing harvesting his field on Chol Moed? For Rav, my time ha'aved hachi. Ein lo ma yochal ha'aved. He had nothing to eat. This was his only food. That's the first answer. To which we say, well, if he had no food, then why was Shmuel upset with him? Well, Shmuel lo simu kameh. Shmuel didn't get the whole story. This is a good case of don't get angry before you know all the details, right? It's a good lesson always to learn in life. Inami, alternatively, Adam Chashuv Shani. It could be, it wasn't the case that Rav didn't have any food, but Shmuel and it wasn't the case where it wasn't Davar Ha'aved, it was Davar Ha'aved. But Shmuel felt that Rav was Rav. We know Rav, everybody was looking at Rav and what he did, and he didn't want people looking at Rav. He had to keep to a higher standard and not even harvest his field, even if it was a Davar Ha'aved, it was going to be a financial loss. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah, so again, we see this Adam Chashuv. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah, okay, he was the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, also a Nasi. Nafik b'chumarta de Medosha. He did two things. He walked out on Shabbat carrying a ring, a signet ring, right, where they usually use it to stamp. It's what we call klisha malachto le'isser, something normally used for forbidden. On the other hand, it's also a ring. So, and he did that. And ishtemaya de achim kfela aramai. Okay, so he did something that was theoretically muktzah by carrying this ring out. And number two, he drank water that a Gentile had heated up. Not on Shabbos. This is a bishul akum issue. You're not supposed to have things cooked by Gentiles. Shama Rabbi Ami Ikpid. Again, we have another story where a rabbi gets upset with another prominent person for doing something. I'm Rav Yosef, my time Ikpid. Well, I don't understand. Imishum chumarta de Madosha, because he was carrying the ring out. Hatanya, it says in the Braita, Shirayim v'nizamim v'tabaot, harein kekol hakelim anitelim b'chatzir. These are all things, even though women aren't supposed to wear jewelry because they might take it off, but theoretically, these are things that, since they have other purposes, you're allowed to wear them. Okay, you can. It's basically what he's saying here. It's a klisha malachto le'isur, which is not the highest level of muktzah. Highest level of muktzah are rocks and things that have no purpose at all. This does have a purpose. It's just a purpose of something you can't use on Shabbat, and therefore you actually can move it. It's not muktzah. And imishum de ishtemaya de achim kfela ramai. That's not bishul akum. Why not? Hamar Shmuel bar Yitzchak amarav. Anything that you eat that could have been eaten raw, this is water, you definitely could have drunk the water before you heated it up. There's no bishul akum. Bishul akum is only when they change the status of something from inedible to edible. Then you can't eat it if a Gentile cooked it. But this is not part of that rule. So I don't understand why you're upset with him. So the answer the Gemara gives is Adam Chashuv Shana. Rav Yosef wasn't talking to Shmuel. We don't have Shmuel's answer. I'm sorry, not Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Ami. He wasn't talking to Rabbi Ami, but he heard the story and he said, I can't understand why Rabbi Ami was upset. And the Gemara answers, again, Adam Chashuv Shani. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was a prominent person. Everyone was going to look at him. He has to keep to a higher standard. He kind of, now, it's unclear. Does he mean both issues? You shouldn't walk out with a signet ring because it's a klisha malachto le'isur, even though he had a possible reason to do it and it was allowed, right? You can carry something that's muktzah if you need it, what we call the tzorach gufo, the tzorach makom. You need to move this, you need the space where it was, or you needed for some reason to, if for its own sake, you needed it to, maybe, you had some purpose for it to be used. So for some permitted reason, then you can move it. Or if he's talking about the bishul akum, and either one or the other or both these cases, he should have been extra careful and shouldn't have done. You can cut wood from a palm tree, even if you just need the sawdust. Light alei Abaye, but Abaye said, cursed is anyone who does this. Well, let's see if this is really true. Rav Ashi havali iba b'Shalnaya. He had a forest in Shalnaya. It was the name of an area. He went to cut it on Chol Moed. Amar le Rav Shila Mishlanya le Rav Ashi, my datech. What? You hold the Kamar of Hanan Lamarav, Kosetz Adam Deka b'Moed, Afal Pisha Eno Tzarich El Nesoret Shelo. Is that who you're holding by? Halayit alei Abaye. Rav Hananel says to him, what are you doing? Even Abaye says you can't do this, even though he said you could. Rav Abaye said, no, you should be cursed if you do this. Amar le, Rav Ashi says, Lo shmi alei, I didn't know that, which really means, Klomar, lo svir alei, which means I don't hold by Abaye. Well, as he was cutting, Ishtimit Narga, the axe breaks, a piece falls out of it, and by lemifsaka l'shake, it almost cut off his thigh. Okay, pretty serious. Shav kevahadarata. He left right away. He saw this as a sign from God, that Abaye was right. Cursed is the person who does this, and he went back after the holiday to finish his work. Rabbi Yehuda shari leme'akar kitna ulemiktal keshuta uleme'akar shumshme. He allowed you to uproot. Okay, again, this is picking things. Uproot flax, cut hops, and uproot sesame. Amalei Abaye le Rav Yosef. Bishlam Katan. I understand why we could do the flax chazeh lechafifa. It's you could use it on the holiday to cover things like maybe figs. Kishuta haps chazeh l'shichra. You could prepare beer from them. But the shumshamim, in order to do anything with them, you have to, if you want to make oil out of them or anything else, first you have to dry them out. So they say chazeh lenazie de ipahu. You can actually eat them even when they're still soft. The sesame seeds, they are edible themselves, and therefore it is worthy for something. Rabbi Yanai havalehu pardesa. Here's a great story. He had an orchard that everything was ripe and ready on Chol Moed. So what did he do, right? It would be a hefsed. You know what happens in an orchard? Things fall on the ground. They're ruined. Katve, he picked the orchard on Chol Moed. Lishana, the following year, Shiur kule alma lepardesayu lechol demoeda. Everybody said, oh, we saw last year Rabbi Yanai did his pardes. He picked it all on Chol Moed. Let's not do it today. Let's push it off to Chol Moed. It's a great time, right? Nice family activity. We'll all go out. We'll pick, right? Think about people do activities on Chol Moed. They go apple picking or fruit, vegetable picking. It actually seems to be another one of these things that, according to the Gemara, it really seems problematic, especially if you're doing it just, right? Now, you might say you're doing it just for fun. On the other hand, it's work. So again, question. But anyway, so they all pushed off to Chol Moed. Rabbi Yanai saw what he had done. This goes back to the Adam Chashuv Shani. And what did he say? Afkare Rabbi Yanai lepardesu ahu shata. He made his whole field hefker. And he basically said, no one can use this field at all. Okay. I'm sorry. This field is not mine. It's owned. Anyone can take anything they want, because he felt terrible about the sin that he caused all these people to do. Okay, again, I'm not saying apple picking is a problem. I just want to put it out there. This is, again, goes back to what we said earlier. It's very confusing to know halacha l'maaseh, what can be done, what can't be done. Okay, last bit, we'll try to get through this quickly. Machnis adam perotav m'pnei haganavim. You can bring your fruits inside if you're worried about robbers stealing them. Again, davar ha'aved. Sholeh pishtanom and mishra, they would soak the flax. You could take it out because it'll get ruined. Bishvil shelo toved. Ubavad sholeh yichaveh malachto b'moed, as we just saw, as long as you don't push it off. And if you did do it, you pushed it off, it will be, okay, now yovedu means it will be lost. Either this means it's like a curse, or it means you have to get rid of them or something. It's unclear exactly how to translate this. Tana, the Braita says, you can only bring it in quietly, secretly. Don't let everybody see it. Don't do publicly. Rav Yosef, havale kishure, he had these wooden beams. Ailinu biyamama. Now, what would you think? Your daytime is good or not good? I think the daytime is public. So Amalei Abaye, how are you bringing these beams into your house? It's Chol Moed. You can only, if you think you're allowed, you can only do it privately. Amalei Sina Dahana Yamamahu. This Sina is during the day, specifically, right? This is, again, what you wouldn't think. Kevan de Belelia, at night, Bau Gavri Yiteri, you have to bring extra people, and they make a lot of noise. Ubau Meduche de Nura, and they have to light a fire. Avshamilta, everyone's going to hear about it, right? Noise during the day, we've already said, people don't hear noises during the day. There's hustle, bustle, nobody notices anything. At night, it'll be much more noticeable, and it'll specifically be for Hestia. So it's like the opposite of what you might have thought. With this, we'll finish for today. Have a great day, everyone. Hope this didn't confuse you more, but at least you understand that there's reason for the confusion, or at least there's basis for it.